Well, good morning.
Morning.
Wow, an audience. No more paper cutouts, you know. Yes, we meet at 10:30 on Sunday morning, and you're welcome to come. Create a problem for us. We're allowed to have 25. Create a problem that we have to double overnight and do 2 services. I'm just saying, I'm up for the challenge.
Amen.
I'm going to start this series with a question, because it's a question every single one of us needs to be asking ourselves. Have you ever wondered if God could really use someone like you? Can God use you? Does he really have a plan? Or is he just making it up as it goes along? You know? If you think the answer is yes, then this summer series on the life of David is for you. David, the shepherd, the king, the warrior, the friend, the sinner, the man of faith. David carried many titles in his life. The one that really blessed me and the one I'm really starting with today is that he was a man after God's own heart. I think it's something every single one of us needs to aspire to. But here's the thing. The issues that plague David's life are common issues that we as individuals face every single day. Every single one of us deals with drama. Oh, we do. Some of it's self-created. We deal with deceit. We deal with devastation. And we deal with doubt. David, unfaithful David, served a faithful God. We need to see that. We need to see the fact that God is faithful. He's not going to leave us, you know, in the midst of our troubles, in the midst of our problems, if they're in the midst of our self-inflicted stuff. God's faithful. He's there. He's waiting for us to respond. As we study together this summer, I want you to be able to learn to spot God's faithfulness, His kindness, His patience, His justice, His mercy, and His grace. Not only in the life of David as we break it down week to week over the 13 weeks, but also I want you to look for how it transfers to you, how it applies to you. Because I'm telling you, every single one of us really are shepherd boys. For the average guy, I'm 62 years old, and I still have this little 10-year-old boy trapped inside of me that runs around occasionally. You know? While my elderly self with the cane and the long flowing beard with the white hair in my mind is running from the back of my head to the front of my head going, no! Every time the little boy gets escaping something. You gotta understand that David lived a life of adventure. Do you understand that every single one of you was created for adventure? God has something magnificent for you in your life. So we're going to start with sort of in the middle of the story. We're not going to really talk about the story. We're going to talk about leading up to the story. You know, there's David and Goliath. You know, one of the blessings of being old is that I actually did attend Sunday school. I heard the stories. You know, a number of years ago I was talking about the story of David and Goliath. And people kept talking to me about this dog and this kid that was a cartoon on TV. Listen, yo, David is not the story that we're talking about here. We're talking about a 9-foot-tall Philistine with a very large spear, with an army behind him, and this little ruddy, little red-headed kid, freckled and all, who had the gall to stand up and say, no, you can't do that. But we're not going to talk about that part of the story. I want to talk about what prepared David for this. What made him this man after God's own heart. And if you look at first Samuel. I'm going to only look at verses 34 to 37. 1 Samuel 17, verses 34 to 37. Because I want you to be able to look at it and understand what made up David's character. Here's a young man. They said he was a teenager. Dad sent him with supplies to his brothers. That's still going on today. You know, every Israeli under a certain age is a soldier. One of the things that I've always enjoyed is I have a couple sites on Facebook I follow about Israel. And it's really cool because you see these young ladies dressed to the nines going out on the town for dinner with their friends with the AK-47s instead of handbags strapped over their shoulders, because they never know when they're going to get called up and get the cell phone call that you've got to come to the troop center and get dressed in your uniform to go. They're always ready. They're always prepared. And listen, I know how it works. They have family members that will bring stuff to them when they're out in the field, because the field is 20 miles away. I want us to see that David, from his youth, served God. We don't know a lot about his early life, but we do know that when he was speaking to King Saul on the verge of his epic and very short battle with Goliath, he said this: "The Lord that delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear is the same God that will deliver me from the hand of a Philistine." I've never heard a teenager talk that way. There was never any doubt in his mind that he could enter this battle alone. God was with him. What type of confidence comes to your life in that way? How do you have confidence about God working in your life? Well, the point is that it comes from an experience cultivated over time with God. David lived a life that was built on his experiences with God. Each step of the way, God layered depth after depth after depth of character in his life. I'm going to read the passage again. "Your servant has killed both lion and bear." God prepared David for this exact battle when David was a lowly shepherd. A lion attacked the lambs and David fought the lion. The bear came against the sheep and David battled the bear. It actually says, if you look into scripture, he grabbed its jaw. How about you? Now I have a friend, Don. Don's father, have you ever seen you know what a roughneck is? The guys that work on the oil rigs. The guys that manhandle these you know, the 80-foot pipes and jam them down the hole, and they belt them and do all the, you know, these. Don's father was a roughneck. He was crude, he was rude, he was gnarly. He was also a very gentle man with his grandkids. But when it came to life, everything was, he was going to manhandle. It was either going to take a hammer or a wrench, you know? Well, Don said one day he was getting up to go to work, and he had heard a commotion out in the yard. He walked out into the yard, and apparently his dad was trying to take the garbage can away from a bear. This is a true story. And I know Don. Don worked at a decorating factory for ceramics, and we were a partner in a business on the side. And Don carried a double-barreled shotgun in his office. And I said, "What's that for?" one day, and he said, "Well, it keeps salesmen away." But you know, this is this Pittsburgh, Clearfield County, Western Pennsylvania mentality. So Don's walking out to the car. He said, "I'm in my sneakers, and I was going to go out to work." And there's Dad wrestling with Bear, trying to take the trash can. The bear is holding the trash can, this metal trash can, and Dad is trying to take it back from him. And Dad is having a conversation with the bear, just like he would be with his crew on the rig. You know, it was quite colorful. You know, and the bear wasn't cooperating. So his dad grabbed the lid of the trash can off the trash can and proceeded to beat the bear senseless over the head with the trash can lid. The bear finally had enough of it, put the trash can down, backed away, and ran into the woods. Victory for the roughneck. Listen, David was this little itty-bitty teenager, and God brought him through these wars where he dealt with a bear, he dealt with a lion, and he had victory. You and I, to have the kind of God confidence in God. And this is one of the things in this pandemic, that there are people hiding under the bed. There are people afraid to walk to the mailbox, lest they say hello to somebody walking down the street. Your confidence in God is cultivated through experiences with God over time. This is God's pattern of preparation for your life. He calls us to be faithful right where we are, and then uses our faithfulness to accomplish greater things. If David ran scared at the lion or the bear, he would have never been ready to fight Goliath in the story. Now, David uses the word deliver. And on every message, I kind of like to bring out a word, a little word study type thing, because we need to be able to, the scriptures have been translated from another language. Fortunately, that those languages are either dead or they've been around long enough that we actually know what the word means. The word deliver in the Old Testament has actually two meanings. There are multiple words, but there are two meanings. One is this concept of deliverance that occurs where, first, the non-theological one. It's a sense of signifying a deliver over or give over into the possession or power of another. The Hebrew word Natan appears over 1,200 times in the Old Testament. Sometimes it's referred to giving objects to another, such as books, money, horses, the goods. More often the term refers to people being delivered in the power of others, usually enemies. The second usage, and the one that David was applying here, is a deliverance that refers to the acts of God, whereas he rescues people from danger. It's actually the word dazel, to draw out, to snatch away. So when we're looking at when David says, God delivered me from the lion, God delivered me from this bear, God will deliver me from Goliath. What David is saying here, he has confidence in the fact that God will act because God has acted in the past. I love my wife. Grab a beverage here. It's nice to pause when you say you love somebody. Okay, thank you. My wife is a writer. My wife is incredibly detailed. I was the kid that finger painted on the wall. Okay? My wife was the one who tried to, and successfully, copied how Norman Rockwell painted with the type detail. So there's the differences between us. But my wife has journaled for years. And there have been moments in our marriage where we have dealt with something. And we labored through it. We struggled with it. We had a problem with it. God was trying to teach us something. And there have been times in our marriage where my wife goes, hold it. We've been through this before. And she scampers down the hall to the bedroom. And she has these little books. And she pulls out 2 or 3 of them. She goes, 1979, August, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky was cloudy all day. God did this in this kind of a circumstance. Next book. 1985, it was June, it was raining. We faced this problem on that day. Look what God did, and this is what God did. 1996, we were thinking about having kids that day. God handled it this way. You gain confidence in your maturity as a Christian when you can look back and you can say, God did this. God did this. God did this. He delivered me. God stepped in and acted. That's why David could handle Goliath. Because God worked in his life. There's a second thing about David that we need to bring out, and it's this. David diligently sought God's face and counsel with a childlike dependence. Do you lean on God? Do you lean on God? As an old man, as my students would say, you know, there's things you can't do anymore, but there's a rock, sit down. God gave you a stick, you can point. I still have a bit of a childlike dependence with him and with God. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. I know how he's dealt with my life. I can see the plan unfolding, I can see his hand working. And I've lived long enough that I don't want to muck it up. I lived long enough where I realize that if I'm patient, in his time, he will perform the doing of it. David lived that way his entire life. More than any other attribute, this childlike dependence upon God made him unique in the list of Bible characters. David sought God's direction in all that he did. He was diligent about it. He wasn't too busy that he might forget a day or two. Each day, throughout the day, he sought God. You know, David had this pattern that he spent time with God in the morning, around noontime, and at dusk. He had not one devotion a day, but he had time squirreled away to invest in God because he wanted to hear from God. That was in a psalm. Another psalm spoke about how that he would cry out to God, God, don't take your spirit from me. He was thirsty. He had this dependence on the fact that he knew that God would act, that God would intervene, that God was moving, and he wanted to participate in it, and he was like a child crying out to his Father. We see it in verses in 1 Samuel 23 and 1 Samuel 30, verse 8. It's 2 Samuel chapter 2, chapter 5, and chapter 23. Do we seek God's face? As a kid, I loved my dad. My dad was a storyteller. My dad worked shift work, so every week he was on a different shift. You know, he worked in a plant. There was the 7 to 3 shift, there was the 3 to 11 shift, and there was the midnight shift. I always loved the midnight shift because there would be Dunkin' Donuts on the coffee table in the living room because he'd come home, he'd pick up a fresh box. You know, back in the day when they made them in the store every 4 hours and they were always fresh, instead of that hard stuff that you buy now. And there will always be 1 or 2 missing, you know. And you'd get up and you'd lift the box up and your favorite would be there. Sometimes Dad would put a note, thought of you. Well, that's that little childlike dependence, you know. Daddy's going to take care of me, and we need that same attitude of dependence with God. There's a third thing. And this is the one that we sang about this morning, and I think we need to dwell on just a little bit more. And the fact is that he worshiped God with his whole being, and then he directed Israel to do the same. David was a musician. David understood that we serve the audience of one, and that we need to have this focal point of worship in our lives. David led by example, and he expected Israel to follow. And if you continue to read the Old Testament, one finds that after David died, the lack of worship and focus on God was the failure of the many kings that followed after him. David had this devotion to God where he worshiped. I do like talk radio. I'll tell you something. I prefer the music. To me, music, someone says, well, what kind of worship should the church have? I said, all of it. And I said, what do you mean? I said, there are times that I like the Gaither-style vocal band. I sang in one. There's times I'd like to think that we could do a jazz vespers with a sax player. than a really rocking out keyboard player. You know, there's times I can enjoy the bluegrass, the Bill Monroe hymns, you know. There are times that I just want a black choir of 75 people dancing to the joy of the Lord, you know. And you say, well, which is worship? I said, it's all of it. God invented ice cream, and there are 39 flavors. And it's okay. Do you know David invented 155 musical instruments in his lifetime? Do you know that the majority of them were percussion? Somewhere there's little blue, well, I apologize, I know there's some blue-haired little old ladies out there that are having a large wet mammal right now. Are you saying that? I'm sorry, get over it. It's in Scripture, go read it. Anyway, you know, the fact of the matter is that it's true. David devoted himself to worship. It was in the soul of his heart, and it needs to be the soul of our heart. You know, you might not be able to sing very well, but God didn't say sing well unto the Lord. He said make a joyful noise to the Lord. So belt it out. Let it out. There's three things to this I want to point out. Point number one. David was a broken worshiper. We're all broken, right? I mean, you know, somebody stole my line the other day on Facebook. I was really a proud parent when they said, you know, we all really are children on the island of misfit toys. And I said, you know, I haven't said that for about 9 years. But that when we started our church, that was the motto of ours, that we are broken toys on this misfit island. We're all broken. We're all screwed up. Mama dropped us all on our head. We commiserate over that. But the fact in Psalm 51, 16 and 17, it says, you do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart to you. God will not despise. The aspect of this brokenness in David's life, he said, God's not going to despise me. God is not going to look down and pity me. God is going to look down and look at me and say, son, you matter to me. I love you as a father loves his child. We need to be that broken worshiper. Second thing, David was a focused worshiper. I love how the scriptures brought that out. That David had this, not only was he this passionate and was worshiper from his heart, but he had a focus. He could hone in on it. In Psalm 63, 1 through 5, it says, God, you, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. In a dry and parched land where there is no water, I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory, because you have love. Your love is better than life. My lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift my hands. And I will be fully satisfied with you with the riches of foods. With the singing lips of my mouth, I will praise you. Let's focus. I'll phrase it a different way. Are you on a mission? Are you on a mission that cannot be denied? I know I drive people nuts. I know that I normally have 25 new ideas by lunchtime. The key of my life is to pare it down, pare it down, pare it down, pare it down. But I see so much. I see God's hand moving. I see God working. I see these like little dust devils swirling up, the Holy Spirit working and doing things, you know. I see it. I can sit on the steps of the other side of the church. I used to, when I first got here, I watched the neighborhood, who was walking by, and I just asked God, bring people by that I could see, you know. I love park benches. I love to sit and see who's walking by, who I can say hi to. And so I say hi to somebody, they might say hi back, and next thing you know, you have a conversation. There's a focus in that. There's a focus where I am not going to let go of something that God has shown it to me. In worship, we have to have that focus. We have to be able to shut out all this nonsense. Stay off Twitter. There's really a lot of angry people on Twitter. And all they want to do is make other people angry. So don't go on Twitter right now. In fact, I might delete Twitter, you know? And I'm really bad because I have three different Twitter accounts because I was told it was really good for ministry. And I realized that, yeah, I've met some really cool people and have some really interesting conversations. But for the most part, it depresses me. You know, it drags me down. So why am I messing with it? Learning to focus. Focus. When I come to worship, this is worship. A worship leader, a worship team, from an educational standpoint, is supposed to draw people into the throne of grace, lead them up the steps into the throne room, that they may sit and bathe in the presence of God through the Holy Spirit. And you and I should be able to, when we come into worship, close out the nonsense in the world and look at what God has been doing in our lives and give Him a drink offering where we take what He has done. We take the hurts that we have and we put it in a pitcher. And when we're at the throne of grace, we pour it out before Him and say, God, this is all you. Please fill me up. Please restore my soul. Please prepare me for what's next. That's a focus that, unless you've experienced how the Holy Spirit ministers to you in song and how He ministers to you in the washing of the Word, you lose sight of that. When you're in your devotional time, you need to shut it out. You need to be focused and say, God, speak to me. I want to hear your voice. I want to see your hand. I want to feel the touch and the presence of your Spirit in my life. We're broken. We're focused. David was passionate. In 2 Samuel 6, David went down and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. 6 steps, and he was already worshiping. David was wearing a loined ephod and danced before the Lord with all his might. And while he and the entire house of Israel brought the ark up to the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets. I don't know if you realized what was saying there. David was dancing in his underwear. Now, we've had worship service with a mosh pit. There were people it never was really up front. It was always back in the back corner where people could, dance a little bit and praise Jesus, But I've never had anybody wandering with underwear. We've had a few tambourines, which scare me, but nobody in underwear. David was the king of Israel. They were taking this holy, sacred thing that represented the absolute presence of God, bringing it up to the house of the Lord. And he's dancing in his underwear around it. Said, wait, we moved 6 feet, hold on, let me kill something and sacrifice it to our glorious God. How passionate are you about God? Do you do Tom Cruise with the mop in the house singing in your underwear when the song comes on K-Love that you just can't hold back? Do you put your windows down? I'll tell you a quick story. In the beginning of my ministry, I had to be bivocational. I'm still at bivocational. But I had a news service where we delivered newspapers and magazines to stores and schools and places like that. And I always had a helper when I went into the inner city. Because when you're out at 2 in the morning, generally they're the bread people, the newspaper people, the snack food people, and police. And anybody else who's out at 2 in the morning is not out there for the right reasons. You know what I'm saying? So I had this dark van, and Tim and I, it was cold. We drive with our windows down because we had to deliver various types of products. And we would wear sometimes our ski mask. So here are 2 white boys in a dark van with ski masks, listening to POD, and the van is vibrating. We're listening to very loud rock Christian music. And we are going through Cobb's Creek area of Philly. And there are people in the corners out like 3 in the morning. And we would pull up because there would be daycare there. We'd have to take newspapers up and leave it on the front steps. I'd sit in the van, Tim, get out, and take the bundles and go up, put them down, come back, you know. But we would clear out the neighborhood because we scared them. We scared people because we're wearing ski masks, we're listening to very loud rock Christian music, shouting praises unto God. You know, our heads are banging, we're having a grand old time, you know, delivered newspapers, and the community was like, I don't think so. Well, how are you passionate about God? Do you put your windows down and just sing along with K-Love? Are you passionate when you're out serving God, doing things, where there are little things that you do? David was passionate. These are principles that he learned in his youth. I could see him sitting out on the hillside with the sheep, singing to the sheep, talking to the sheep, talking to God, telling the sheep about God. I've seen kids like that, you know? David served from his youth. David was diligent and sought the face of God in childlike dependence. He worshiped God with his whole being and directed those people around him. He was a disciple maker. Fourth thing, it won't be long. He was humble. Seems weird, huh? He was humble. He recognized that God was the real king of Israel and he was only God's representative. You know my job as a pastor, as someone who works in a prophetic way? I am one of God's noisy mouthpieces. It's my gift. I talk about God. My job is to make you uncomfortable. I like that, you know? Because I know. Listen, I know it. I know that I know that I know. As sure enough that I know that I'm saved. I know that one of these days, based upon the Word of God, I'm going to have a conversation with my Father in heaven on the other side. I know what he's doing. If you read the end of the story, he's going to call people up and confront them about their acts of service. Did you do what I told you to do? And you know how he's going to confirm that they knew? He's going to call up pastors and spiritual leaders and parents. And he's going to call them up and he goes, Chuck, did you tell them X, Y, Z? And because I know that we are going to have those conversations, I'm going to be a real pain in the neck. Because I am not going to stand up to the creator of the universe and have the conversation where he can go bing and smack me off Mars because I wasn't obedient. So you can trust in the fact that if I've heard from him on something, I'm going to tell you about it. As if the fact that we are going to, and we will have this conversation in another place. Well, David understood this. David understood that the real king of Israel was God. I am very frustrated, as David was, with how his people reacted to God. I am very frustrated right now in our country. There are so many Christians more concerned about having an earthly king than they are about building God's kingdom on earth. That bothers me. It creates a humility in me from the standpoint of saying, just like David. David had this humility where he realized his calling, he realized who God was. And it says this in, bear with me a second. There's a passage. It says this, David became king over Israel. All the tribes, 2 Samuel 5:2. David became king over Israel. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, we are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel in their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, you will be the shepherd of the people of Israel. You become their ruler. And when the elders of Israel had come to David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron and before the Lord. and they anointed the king, David, king over Israel. And David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. In Jerusalem, he reigned over all of Israel and Judah 33 years. David understood authority, David understood humility, and he possessed both of it. We're going to look at some point in the series about when God finally, David sinned just a little too much. You know, David's heart was to build this temple to glorify God, this audience of one. And God wouldn't let him do it. You're a bloody man, God told David through the prophet. David was humble, even in the midst of his sin. He would receive the word of the Lord. David was this broken man, this passionate man. And you know how he handled God saying no? He said, well, if I'm not allowed to build it, I will make sure that he who does will have everything he needs to build it. And for the remainder of his life, he stockpiled building materials. He stockpiled gold, he stockpiled timber, he stockpiled everything. So when his son took the throne to build this massive temple, he had what he needed. David had this humility, this awe of God, this respect for authority, that even when he was told that I am now going to limit what you can do, I can't bless you in this area, I can't allow someone who has so much blood on their hands build my temple. Last point. David's public conduct, he largely obeyed the Lord and carried out his will. David messed up all along the way. But when God said, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, he performed the doing. It's the mark of a true disciple. You set aside the hurts. You set aside whatever, and you say, God, what is your will? Those are the characteristics of David from his youth. Do you hear that? From his youth. David was a man after God's own heart. My prayer, may we be people after God's own heart. May we learn over this summer what we need to add to our lives to experience what David experienced. Let's pray. Father, have your way with us all. We are so overwhelmed with your provision, your blessings, how you've met our needs in the midst of all these trials, all these problems that we have faced in our world today. Lord, you've kept us safe. You've spoken to us. You allowed us the privilege of ministering in your name to feed the thousands, to pray with people, to bless people, to meet needs. Lord, may we revisit this message today, all week long. Would you echo in our hearts and our minds these truths, that where we fall short, that you would raise us up and strengthen us and raise the standard in our lives, that we might be able to say, we also serve the audience of one, undeterred. May our worship be undignified. May we dance in the street before you. Have your way with us this morning, Father. In Christ's name.